fictional friends, and welcome to another episode of Fully Booked. I'm Megan.
And I'm Shireen.
And it's May. And it's
Yay!
YA Fantasy Month. We kicked things off last week, and this week we're continuing our coverage of young adult fantasy for the entire month of May, because there's just something about it that never goes away for anybody, which is what we're talking about today, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I'm like trying to think, like, why did we go for fantasy in May? And then I was thinking about A Midsummer Night's Dream, because wasn't that like one of the first like fantasy play things?
I think so.
But that Midsummer is like what, like June?
I think it's June or July, but it's something like that. Yeah. It's when you get, was basically, I guess it's like when you get into the summer solstice.
Yeah.
Probably. Yeah. But there's something, I don't know, there is something about like, I guess spring and like early summer anyway in general, where like there's something about it where like a fantasy, and maybe it's like to do with like the new beginnings and things growing and whatever, like the nature aspect of it like makes me think of fantasy as a genre.
Yeah.
But there's something about it. And like, you know, and of course, like, you know, it's spring, new possibilities, new romance, things like that. So then you get into the YA kind of aspect of it. I don't know. It works really well in the spring. It works really well in the fall.
It's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially if anybody's at a school fall. Give me that.
Yeah, like I think if you think like Harry Potter and stuff, like I always read Harry Potter in the fall, because it's like they're always going back to school at the beginning and like,
your Harry Potter, your Twilight, like all those kinds of things to me like scream fall. There's something about
Twilight
them.
To me is like a January or like
really?
And I don't know if it's because she goes to Forks in like January or like March or something.
Maybe.
So
I don't know.
Like
it's
a January.
It's
March
dreary,
read.
so it's hard to say what time of year it is, but that's possible. That could have something to do with it too. Okay, so we're going to get into talking about all of this stuff to do with young adult fantasy specifically, and why, I guess, some of the reasons that we think that its popularity just continues to like grow year after year after year, and why it's still such a big thing. And it really doesn't show any kind of signs of slowing down anytime soon. I feel
true.
like anytime you go to the bookstore now, you're like, oh, there's more of them.
There's more of them.
I'm never going to get through all of them, so.
Oh, no, and like it's expanded so much. So, but before we get into it, Megan, what's on your nightstand?
So I recently, speaking of like, I guess like YA fantasy kind of, I took like a little break in between like novels per se, and I read a graphic novel for fun called Mooncakes. It was really
Very
cute
poignant.
By an author named Suzanne Walker. It's just really cute. Like, it's again one of those like very cozy sort of really cute reads. It's like a young witch who like helps run like a bookstore with a bunch of magical books in it with her two grandmothers. They run it together, and then a former friend of hers / like kind of love interest comes back to town. They're a werewolf. And the two of them, like, they like fall in love, but then they have to also, like, the werewolf has been tracking like weird like magical activity and stuff like that, and anyway, so they have to, and they figure out that it's like someone in the town's been doing something, so they have to work together, you know, through sort of like their own insecurities and stuff like that to like to fight this person basically into end everything. But it's cute because they have like their little love story that's happening in like a very normal like teenage kind of way.
Cute.
Well, teenage, I should actually, you know what, I shouldn't even say teenage. I think they're in their early 20s.
Oh, right.
Yeah, because like the lead, her best friend has kids. So
Oh, wow. Okay.
yeah. So I shouldn't really say it like that, but it does read kind of YA style, probably because it's a graphic novel as well, but like the illustrations are really fun. It's very almost anime kind of, but like a little bit old school looking, but it's just cute.
Yeah.
The characters were fun.
Yeah.
I like witches and werewolves and all that kind of stuff. So I was like, yay. Okay.
Yeah. Cute.
It was fun. What about you?
Well, I've got just a little bit of a Court of Silver Flames left, as I mentioned in one of our last episodes. So once I'm done that, I'm like faced with the decision, do I go into Crescent City, also by Sarah Moss?
Those books look so big.
They're so big. I'm like, I don't know if I can do it. Like, I just came out of like so many books that are so fat.
Sometimes I feel like with like high fantasy style reading, if you get through a series, for instance, if you've got like 2, 3, 4, however many there are, I usually need a break after I do that.
Yeah, and that's what I'm thinking, like, because it is taking me longer to read this one.
Makes
it's
sense.
A bit
You're probably
slower.
getting a bit tired.
Like, I'm getting a bit tired, and so what I think I might pick up instead as, like, a breather is The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo.
That, I've only heard good things about this book. I haven't read it, but I've only heard good things.
Yeah, someone at work, I mentioned it to someone at work, and she was like, it is one of my top 5 favorite books ever. So she's like, you have to read it. So I'm like, all right, like, let's go. And I think they're making like a show or a movie.
I was gonna say, I think
Netflix is making
something. Someone's doing something, a movie or a TV show, or someone's doing something with it. I definitely very, very quickly saw like a headline or something come across my screen at some point. Yeah, that's totally possible.
Yeah.
I might have seen it at work or something, whatever. I work with people who are like constantly writing entertainment news.
Right. Okay.
So I might have seen it, like someone put something out there and I might have come across it that way too. I don't know, but I'm pretty sure that they are. Yeah. Which is cool. More adaptations are good, guys. Cause if not, I feel like all we're getting are sequels or requels to things, which like can be fun, but at the same, or like a remake of something, which like eventually you're like, okay.
Yeah, like, it's like, okay, do we have to go through this again? Like, I can't believe that they're remaking a Harry Potter TV show. Like, I'm just like...
And a Twilight TV show, probably.
Like, it's like, I get it. Like, it's profitable, so I understand.
Yeah,
but
it's never going to die, and I get it.
It was done in a certain way, which was not perfect to
No,
begin
not
with.
at all.
But it is what it is. Like, just
man.
leave it, man. Like, there's so many books out there that they could make
It's
adaptations of and
just
spend the money on, you know?
it's crazy because there are so many that have been optioned as well. Like, it just feels like more and more of them are happening. So I'm like, ignore what has happened in the past and let's just move forward. So all of the ones that are being, you know, published now and have been in the last 3, 4, 5 years, whatever, you know, that have gained massive traction, make those into movies.
Give me an ACOTAR TV show.
Yeah, that's it. Well, they probably
TV show, like, they're going to for sure. But
it'll get there. But I do understand, obviously, also, like, you know, we throw all these things out into the ether. Obviously, anything fantasy is going to have a massive fucking budget because you have no choice. You have no choice due to world building, due to the magics themselves that are used, costume, makeup, like all of the things that come along with that type of show. Like, man, I don't even want to talk about Rings of Power.
Oh, that was
budget.
Like, what, $1 million an episode or something? It was way more. It was more.
I think the whole show cost like $1 billion to make. It's ridiculous.
And they put a lot in there.
I mean, don't get me wrong. It looks fucking beautiful, though. Like, when you're watching it, you're like, wow.
Yeah. No, they did a great job.
It looks great. Anyway.
Anyway.
That's not what we're here to talk about. Okay. So, getting into YA fantasy specifically, I think literally even considering what we were just talking about, I'm pretty sure that everyone kind of knows at this point, even if you're not super interested in it as a reader, you probably have read some before or you're aware of some of the big titles that exist.
Yeah, definitely. And also I think it's worth mentioning that like YA fantasy, it really like encompasses a lot of different
I'm not
stories.
just,
like it's
I'm not
just
talking
like
about,
you know, giant world building like Lord of the Rings, fairies,
I don't need
and
it to be. I don't need it to just be that. It's
vampires or werewolves.
Or,
you know,
and it's like witches and you can do it in the style, and I'm talking like, you know, in the style of, yes, high fantasy where it's like a world that doesn't exist, but you can also do like an urban fantasy where it's like, it just, you know, it's the regular world, there happen to be witches in it, for instance, or there happen to be werewolves
vampires,
in it, whatever it is. Like, there are so many different kind of like angles that you can take because, you know, all you're basically doing is that you're taking any type of different subgenre of fantasy, be it high fantasy, urban fantasy, anything else, like, you know, of those, like, of that type, and you're just making the characters young adults. Like, that's pretty, and then it's, ta-da, it's YA fantasy.
And ta-da, it's actually, for me anyway, like, I find it way more, I prefer YA fantasy than, like, adult fantasy.
There's just something about the coming of age aspect, I think. I think that's like what it mostly boils down to, is that, you know, people finding themselves, you know, and coming into their own as human beings. So many of us, no matter what age we're at now, you're either experiencing it in a lot of cases or you have experienced it already. So the relatability
Yeah.
is there for people. And even if you are past that point, like we fucking are,
Oh, yeah.
even if you are past that point in your life, or even if you are a little bit older and you feel like you're still experiencing things like that, you can relate so very much to characters who are going through those same things.
Absolutely. Like, you know, I think obviously when I first started reading YA fantasy, I was in like, you know, high school,
probably.
early years of high school. And there was just something so comforting
Yes.
about all of these different stories. And even now I find such comfort in them.
Yeah.
It's, you know, you're kind of weird, or like this character is kind of weird. They're kind of an outcast. They don't really fit in. But then there's something that happens where they meet other people and they're accepted.
Yes.
Or, you know, they go into a new world where they can be a superhero.
Yeah,
Or they
or
can
they,
be
like-
anyone, you know?
Or even somebody, like, even if you keep it a little bit more like real world, quote
Yeah.
unquote, somebody discovers that they have a particular ability and
Yeah.
they learn to harness that ability and how they can use it for usually the right reasons, I
Yeah.
would say most of the time. You know, like if I think back to like when I was like 14, let's say, and I was probably reading a lot more of these things. Like Harry Potter doesn't count because I find like you start that shit when you're like 10 years old most of the time.
Yeah, and like it's so far reaching.
Yeah,
you
that's
know?
it. So that's like that. I feel like it's still in the same scope, obviously, but I feel like that's for like a slightly younger audience to begin with. Yes, it grows, but that's why like you grow as you read the books. But I like when I was 14, 15, I started reading things like the Mediator series from Meg Cabot. That for me was like one of the ones that like had gotten me into a lot of the stuff because it was one of the first like full series that I read. So it was like 7 or 8 books. You know, and it's very real world set, but it is real world set with a lead who can communicate and see dead people, and she helps them pass over.
Oh, sounds good.
And those are they're really fun.
Yeah.
I'm sad that you didn't read them when you were younger. I think you would have liked them.
Yeah.
And then, you know, she moves into a very old house with her mom and her new stepfather and stepbrothers and stuff like that. And it turns out there's the ghost of a guy who happened to be murdered back in like 1850 in her bedroom, because that was
Wow.
like the house that he was in when he died, and he's super hot. And then a love story develops throughout the course of several books.
Yeah.
And sort of like all the things that she's working through with figuring out what she can do and the people who kind of help her with that, and her coming into her own with it too. And then, you know, your usual kind of also still trying to be like in high school.
Yeah. Yeah, and I really appreciate that. You know, like this, when you get like a main character who's a girl, oftentimes it's like, you know, about her becoming empowered and
Yes.
strong and like finding her voice. And like, I think it's really important for young women to read that kind of story. I know that there's, you know, I think there's, you know, a lot more movement towards having like diverse voices in YA fantasy.
Now so much
what's
more.
that one called? Is it the Children of Blood and Bone or something?
Oh yeah, I remember seeing something about that. Hold please.
Hold, please.
She's crawling away.
Yes, the Children of Blood and Bone.
Okay.
I think that's a trilogy, and I believe that they're making it into a TV.
Probably. It's so hard with fantasy to just make a movie.
Yeah.
Because there's too much world building to do.
Yeah,
You don't
there's
have
also
enough time to establish anybody.
Yeah, there's also the Gilded ones too.
Yeah.
That's also another kind of diverse voice in YA fantasy. But for me, anyway, like as an adult, either going back to old like YA fantasy
Sure.
that I'd read, I obviously take a lot of comfort in that. And then even new YA fantasy, like I still get really engrossed in it because I just think that the characters are so endearing a lot of the time.
Relatable the majority of the time, honestly.
And it just doesn't really take itself as seriously.
No, that's true. There are many stakes in many cases, but the stakes never feel quite as intense as
Yeah.
they do in sort of like adult
Yeah,
fantasy.
like, you know, there's a whole war and you're like, okay, like
Yeah,
this is heavy.
most of
you know?
most of the time in YA fantasy, like 5,000 people aren't going to be murdered.
Right. I mean, sometimes they are.
Kind
like,
of.
I'm sure that there are a lot of examples of that. Throne of Glass is one of them.
Sure.
Like, it's the end of the fucking world. But
Yeah,
like,
but it just feels different when teenagers are dealing with the end of
Yeah.
the world than when adults are doing it. I'm like, oh God, it's for real, for real. There's something about it
Absolutely.
that makes me like a lot more anxious.
and then like you get of course, like the TV or movie adaptations, and when they do it well,
Yes.
it's like going back and revisiting old friends, you know? Like,
Oh
it's,
God, for sure.
you know, it's like watching like the Vampire Diaries or something.
Yes.
Like, there's so much comfort for me in the Vampire
Yeah,
Diaries.
those types of shows and stuff do provide just like that's at that level
Yeah.
of comfort for people. And I'm sure that even like some of the newer ones that, have come out, are coming out, will do the same thing for people in like 10, 12 years,
Yeah.
like when they're kind of like coming back to it.
Yeah.
That will happen for them as
For
well.
sure.
Shadow and Bone will probably be like that for people.
Oh, I was going to mention Shadow and Bone. I think that because I read the Shadow and Bone, and I also read the Six of Crows.
Yeah.
The TV show, they did a fantastic job.
Oh, did they?
Thought a lot of people didn't like it, but they merged both of them into
maybe
like
that's
one TV
why.
show.
I
The
find
casting was like top notch.
I don't find that you can. Yeah, I find most of the time I'm not overly bothered. Like I'm not like a super purist. Like whatever, man. Like if the character, if like people don't like the casting because of XYZ reasons.
Yeah.
But like or those things where they've like they update certain things, they change certain things, and there are like times where I'm like that was fucking terrible. But most of the time I'm like yeah okay whatever
Yeah,
sure
it's
they
fine.
decided to do it this way instead.
Yep.
Makes no difference to me really. So
No, so that's it. So I think a lot of it in for me anyway, in YA fantasy is the characters. Like they're quirky,
Yeah.
they're unsure of themselves, like, and then they come into their own, they get empowered, they become strong. There's always kind of that like romance twist that gets thrown in there.
yeah, there's usually a first love aspect to it, and
which is also fun to read.
which again, like I think is also nice to read because again, there's a relatability of you're like, oh God, I remember that. Like I remember those sorts of feelings
Yeah.
when you were younger and when you were experiencing that kind of emotion for like the first time, basically. And it does like for a lot of us, for instance, like, you and I have been in long-term relationships for a good period of time now. There's like, that little thing where you're like, oh, I remember like, like the excitement of like the beginnings of new relationships and things like that, like, cause right now you have like now at this point, like I have the comfort in my relationship that comes with something well-established long-term where somebody like my partner really knows everything about me. Whereas I find, that's it, there's still something fun to be had with like, that's it, the excitement of like a new beginning and the excitement of the start of a relationship, how you feel about it and discovering things about each other, like all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, which you really get kind of reading these YA fantasy. You almost, especially when like the love interest is the supernatural figure and not the main character.
Yes.
Like that always kind of comes with that additional layer of like discovering who this person is or what they are. And it can be quite fun to read and just like really I find that with YA fantasy more than anything I get drawn into the story and I just that experience when you're reading where you're completely immersed in the story and you don't know what's going on around you. That's why YA fantasy is, I would say, it's my favorite genre. It is my favorite genre by far.
Yeah, you don't have to. And I think that we're past the point too of like everybody's got to be cool and they all have to like specific things. Like you don't have to be like an apologist about it or anything. I think that we're it's nice that we've kind of headed into an era where like you find out that so many people around you have like these similar interests in things that wouldn't necessarily be considered like age appropriate, quote unquote, whatever you want to call that. Like that you're like, oh, why are you reading books about teenagers? Or like, why do you like this kind of movie? Why do you like that kind of thing? Whatever. And I find that interests now are so diverse and varied that you don't have to feel bad about them anymore or like, be quiet about them. Like people who really like spend a lot of their time reading romance, like straight up romance novels. I'm talking about not like something that's like a young adult fantasy, but like a straight up like romance novels and things like that. I don't think that people have to like pretend that they don't anymore kind of thing. I think that if you enjoy them, you're going to find other people who do as well. So it's just not something you have to worry about. So nobody now has to be like, oh yeah, I still read things about like, like fantasy novels about like, that's it, like teenagers and stuff like that. No one fucking cares because like 25 other people near you are going to be like, oh yeah, me too.
Yeah. And that's pretty much all I watch on TV as well. My husband is so fed up.
He's just like, oh my God, all of these are the same, Shireen.
Although, to be fair, he's pretty good about them. His only criteria is that I'm never allowed to rewatch Pretty Little Liars, which that's fair. That was pretty terrible.
Yeah, that one. Man, that I stopped watching that show at some point because it just was going in a direction that I was like, okay, I don't think I'm gonna like this.
Not that it's fantasy; it's just
No, it's
crap.
It's
but
not.
but I did go through the whole thing. I am a completionist.
Yeah,
so.
and I do find that we're, I don't know, I wish that that's it. All of these great, books that are being written with like these exciting new worlds and new characters and different characters and stuff. I wish that those were the ones that were being focused on more. We're still not quite past that point of fucking remaking everything that we can possibly remake. Look, like
Because
we're getting.
they know that it makes money. And
Because we're getting updates of Twilight. We're getting updates of Harry Potter. We got updates of Gossip Girl and Pretty Little Liars. They both got new TV shows.
I don't know what that was about. I haven't even watched them. Like,
I think they've all been canceled as well. I'm not sure.
But why remake something that was made like not even 20 years ago?
Well, yeah, that's the thing, right? And and it's, when you do stuff like that, I find like, fine, the original properties weren't incredible all the time and they weren't perfect, but like I think especially like if a TV show is difficult or like a series of films is really difficult to do something like that with, because even if you don't love all of the casting, even if you don't love all of the people, you get attached to seeing them as that character.
Yeah.
And so then you're taking something 5 years later and you're like, oh, I'm going to remake it. And you're like, but I expect this person to be that character. And now they're not going to be. And I don't know how to feel about that.
It's so true.
It's weird.
Someone other than Emma Watson playing Hermione Granger.
I don't really want it.
I don't want it.
Yeah.
Like, I don't need it in my life. Like anybody other than Robert Pattinson playing Edward Cullen. Not that he was the perfect casting option.
None of them are. Like,
but it doesn't matter. He is Edward Cullen now.
It's too late. It's done. It happened for like, what, 5 fucking movies? Like, I'm not going to see it again. Like, I don't need to see anybody else doing it. I'm like, no, I'm good.
I mean,
I had, my opinion of it was already shattered when all the weird casting choices happened and you're like, oh, that's not what I pictured at all. Exactly. But it happened and then I got used to it.
Yeah, and then you kind of had to live with it, So I don't know why we're rehashing it. But yeah, there's so much opportunity, and to your point, like they keep buying the rights to these things and just not doing anything with it. Like ACOTAR,
like 4 years later, you're like, what? Are we getting
just
this?
Make the fucking show, please.
Yeah, like you're looking for all these like times and like to make them. I'm like, now is the time.
Now is the time. Just do it. Like people are ready.
Well, I think I read briefly somewhere that like in like 2021, like within the year, I think something like young adult fantasy sales were up like, I don't know, 68% or something. Like they're just
wanted to
growing
the pandemic.
No, which like fair. Talk about like the ultimate escapism. It's just like teenagers at like a magical school or some shit.
Totally.
Like, yes, please get me out of here.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think all of that to say is that, like, we like it. It's fun. We've been reading it. We're going to keep reading it. And then we're going to, watch these remakes and probably get really irritated with them. But we're going to do it anyway. And maybe that's where the studios are smart and they fucking know it as well. That we're going to be like, fine, I'll watch it.
Well,
and I'll get mad about it.
Obviously. They've got their sights on a whole new generation of teenagers as well.
I guess that's true. But I just feel like, I'm sure that the teenagers now aren't all interested in seeing the exact same thing that we saw 15 years ago when they could just fucking watch it if they wanted they wanted to as well.
That outdated people.
No. But anyway, how do you guys feel about YA fantasy? I'm sure a lot of people are going to be like, how do you think I feel about it? I fucking love it. Anyway, you can let us know, though, over on Instagram at fullybookedca. You can also check out our Facebook group, which is at facebook.com/groups/book was way better. And if you're still here with us, which I hope you are for the super fun month of coverage that we're doing, please feel free to leave us a 5-star rating and review wherever you're listening, because it really helps us get the show out in front of more people. But until next week, guys, keep on reading.
Thanks, everyone.